Hi, I'm Jacob Wood from Accessible Games and the chief editor of Accessible Gaming Quarterly, the tabletop zine about accessibility and disability in the industry. I'm joined today by Tara Clapper of the Geek Initiative to talk about digital live-action role-playing. Tara, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you so much. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for being here.
Of course.
I would love to dip into the waters of tabletop digital live-action role-playing, but before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Tara, and I have a background in publishing and marketing professionally. I grew up originally in Philadelphia, and now I live in the Washington, D.C. area. And I have been doing live action role playing games for about 13 years, and I've been running them online for 3 years now.
Wow, so it sounds like you have quite a bit of experience there.
Yeah, not as much as some, but it's definitely been a nice chunk of my life. And as I've kind of changed and as my body has changed, it's been nice to be able to still participate in LARP while I'm able to accommodate my accessibility needs.
That is awesome, and we will definitely talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Before we talk more about the accessibility side of things, though, can you tell us a little bit about digital LARP and how that might differ from traditional LARP?
Sure. So in traditional LARP or live action role playing, you're usually in person with a bunch of other participants. And LARP covers such a wide variety of things. So it can be a parlor LARP where you're kind of all in the same room, which is generally a little bit more accessible for people who might have issues standing for a long time because you can kind of sit. And then there's boffer LARP, which is you're out in the field with, a foam weapon, running around and hitting each other with foam swords. Obviously, if you have some physical difficulties, such as I do, boffer LARP isn't always as accessible. And digital live action role playing actually takes place over the computer, kind of like a Zoom call like we're having right now. Basically, if we were LARPing, we would basically just both be in character, talking to each other face to face. And a lot of people think it's the same thing as running a tabletop game online, right? So if we were playing Dungeons and Dragons and I were the dungeon master, I might say, uh, great, you walk down a hall and you encounter a dragon. Like, I'm narrating it, I'm telling you what you see. We're still telling a collaborative
Right.
story, but it's narrated. In a digital LARP, the difference is most of the content is non-narrated. So it's like you and I talking together. And in some cases, the platform itself is even part of the game. So a video call might be actually part of the LARP, which is pretty immersive.
So do you use some of those features of Zoom or Google Hangouts or something that can do overlays to get into character a little bit better?
Absolutely. So on Zoom, you can actually use virtual backgrounds. So sometimes we do that. I run a game called Lore, or Live Online Raptor Experience, which is just as ridiculous as it sounds. And in that game, you're trying to escape this dinosaur island, right? And so what we do, and I'm going to kind of display it here, I'm going to kind of give you a run through as we go. So what we do is I might have a forest background, which is what I have up now. So someone might go into the forest and they'll be like running through the forest. And then they might change it to being in an office, which is what I have as my digital background now. So you can definitely use things that way. Sometimes we all use the same background, like I'll provide it to everybody so that it all looks like we're in the same setting. So that's kind of cool. There's actually a lot of advantages to using a platform like Zoom or Google Meet. And we also use Discord, which I try to stay away from because it's not the most accessible platform. But
Yeah, I've had that experience.
yeah, I've heard it's getting better, but most of my stuff I run on Zoom because it's a little bit more accessible for everybody.
That's awesome. So what is that draws you personally to the style of gaming over, say, other types of gaming like tabletop role playing or board gaming?
So, I mean, in LARP, like I said, there are tons of different styles in LARP. And I started out as a boffer LARPer, and I actually really loved like the theatrical storytelling aspect of LARP. And once I got past all the mechanical crunch, all those numbers, what it came down to is I like telling a story with other people. And after doing boffer LARP for so long, especially when I started to have some accessibility issues, I played a game called New World Magiscola, which is kind of called a destination LARP or a blockbuster LARP. Like, it's full weekend, immersive, but it's not at a campground in the woods. It's like in an air-conditioned campus where this beautiful campus, is the setting for a wizard college. And so I was able to focus on collaborative storytelling there, and the environment matched my accessibility needs more. And since those types of games take place like on campuses or sometimes in hotels, the accessibility needs are usually already met by the venue because colleges and hotels have to be ADA compliant. So
Right.
as long as there are ramps and stuff available, those are usually a little bit more accessible. Now, digital LARP is more accessible in some ways because financially it's less expensive, so it's more financially accessible, or even free. There are a bunch of free ones out there. You need a computer, which most people already have, an internet connection, and just kind of the capability to sit in front of the computer as we're doing now. So there are lots of different styles, but what drew me to LARP in general and digital LARP over tabletop games is more the versatility and the collaborative play. Each player really shapes the story rather than the GM just dictating how it goes. And when I GM, I actually like to play a character who's kind of a facilitator or can move the plot around a bit, but for the most part, I'm a player. And that's also a way that I handle running such a large volume of games. It's also running games online, whether you're running tabletop or LARP, is also generally more accessible. That was something people didn't really hear about outside of the community interested in accessibility until the pandemic hit. And of course, suddenly our accessibility needs are everybody's accessibility needs because
Yes, I've had
everyone's
that experience too.
exactly. So, and sometimes it gets overlooked, and that really bothers me because I'm one of the main developers of this type of LARP, and a big reason I did it was for physical and financial accessibility. So, that's kind of an advantage that this form has, and also the storytelling form is more accessible to people who haven't LARPed before. So it's totally friendly to anyone who's just starting or who has, been LARPing for years and years. There are
That
a
makes
couple,
sense.
yeah, there are a couple of issues I've heard with like digital LARPs and Zoom. There's a phenomenon called Zoom fatigue, which, people who are on Zoom meetings all day for work, they just don't want to do that again when they're off of work at night. Or people who have autism sometimes have difficulty processing all of the different pictures on the screen, all of the different sounds, all of the different, voices, all of the different complexities. And sometimes it's also harder to read social cues on digital platforms. So that's another accessibility concern. It's not perfect, but it's what we've got during a pandemic.
Sure. So you have talked about the accessibility concern, but there's also a lot of accessibility bonuses. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your own accessibility needs, if you're comfortable with that, and how digital art plays into that?
Absolutely. My accessibility needs have evolved through the years, which is probably an experience that a lot of other people have as well. I started out,
Absolutely.
having some difficulties after a series of car accidents and had back and neck injuries. And then I also developed autoimmune conditions. So I have polycystic ovarian syndrome and rheumatoid arthritis, and just a bunch of autoimmune stuff, Also in March, my doctor believes I had COVID. So that was really difficult. The recovery was hard, and now I'm suffering from post-COVID. So I'm getting all sorts of like skin rashes and fatigue, and it's upsetting my autoimmune conditions. So
Not fun.
not fun at all. Not fun at all. So in addition to all the other stuff I've got, I have that kind of piled on top of it. And, being able to do this on the computer, and I'll switch back to my real life background here again. I recently was able to purchase one of those nicer gaming chairs, which has been a lot better for my back. I'm short, so I went into the store and actually tried them out, because a lot of them are made for taller people. And so being able to do this out of the comfort of my home has really helped. And when I started, I had just lost a full-time job. So all of my friends were like, I want to give you money to run a LARP. And I appreciated that they were that supportive, but I was like, that requires insurance and a venue and a lot of, transportation and physical needs that I just couldn't meet. But I was like, well, if I run it digitally, I don't have to spend any money to do it. I already have everything I need. So that's really helped me. And I've also heard from parents who play my LARPs that it's a lot easier on them. It's a lot more accessible for them, because they don't have to necessarily arrange childcare outside of the home. And lastly, one thing I've noticed, especially at Baffer LARPs, is that if you have a couple and one person is masculine and the other femme, usually the femme partner is kind of expected to stay at home with the children, while the masked partner gets to go and have fun times at Baffer LARPs, which isn't fair.
Right.
So yeah, and so with this, both can participate, or either or can participate, and it's usually a little bit easier.
That segues really nicely into my next question. It sounds like there's some really great benefits in terms of time. What kind of time commitment are we looking at with a digital LARP? Is it like a typical 4-hour gaming session, or is it longer or shorter?
Yeah, well, firstly, there's no travel time to get to your digital LARP. So when
Yeah.
people do LARPs in person, I've driven 8 hours each way to get to a LARP. And that not only takes time, but money, the expense of travel. Sometimes people fly to them. And especially in a pandemic, that's difficult to do. If you're immune compromised, like me, I'm immunocompromised. And even though I had COVID, I don't have antibodies. So I don't want to go back out there again and, get exposed. So eliminating the travel time helps. Now, digital LARPs can run pretty much in any range, but like you said, most sessions last no longer than 4 hours, because that's about the attention span most people have, and the time commitment most people can offer without having to eat a whole big meal and stuff. So I have a single session LARP that runs 2 hours, which is free. It's called Project Memory. If you look up Project Memory LARP, you can find it. I have the game Lore that I talked about earlier, the funny one about dinosaurs. That one is a single session, 3 to 4 hour game. And then most of my LARPs take place, each campaign is four sessions, and each session is 3 to 4 hours. So it's kind of like a short tabletop campaign in terms of how much time is required.
Great. You mentioned this a little bit earlier about game mastering. What is the game master's role in a LARP if not to be the narrator?
That's a great question. So again, varies from LARP to LARP. Generally, they're concerned with making sure that everybody is able to participate, whether that means everyone gets a say, everyone gets a spotlight. Some of us with disabilities, or people who were, socialized as femmes, we are kind of taught that it's okay to be talked over, and a good game master will make sure everybody gets their say. So all those biases that are conscious or not, the GM should kind of be on the lookout for, and just make sure that everyone gets a say. Also, they can move the plot along. So in a freeform game, I'll introduce various elements or things that happen, or objects that advance the story. And in my LARPs, the story advancement is really character based. So you have a character sheet with all sorts of different ties and history, and that's what really generates the role play and the plot in these types of LARPs. And so if I write the character sheets as I usually do, I obviously know what's on them. I have a second monitor because I have brain fog and memory issues, or maybe I wrote the characters 4 weeks ago and I don't remember them. So I can reference all the characters, make sure I'm including everyone, and then, kind of move the plot along. If there are mechanics in the LARP, the game master is also responsible for adjudicating the mechanics, making sure everybody's playing fairly, and that kind of thing. And of course, the game master also, not always, but typically is an organizer. So in my role, I usually serve as both the organizer, the game designer, and as well as the game master. But I do hire other game masters to actually run some of these digital LARPs. So if I feel like I'm overwhelmed, I have a couple people I can call in and pay to do the thing, which is also nice.
That is awesome. You mentioned that game masters are also facilitators, and just as an aside, because I have to put this in there, I have long been an advocate of game masters as leaders, and I feel like every game master who wants to be better at their craft should really study leadership because there's a lot of overlap. How do you feel like game masters and the LARPing hobby as a whole have been in terms of being able to facilitate, or do you have that experience like a lot of D&D kind of DMs where they are sometimes more of a dictator than a leader?
I hope I'm more of a leader, and I think I learned to be a better leader through LARP. And a big chunk of that, which I do have to credit Boffer LARP for as well, because this is also a big part of Boffer, is safety. And, a good game master, as well as a good organizer, will focus on both physical and emotional safety. So even if you're running a digital LARP where you're not running around and like hitting people with foam swords, there are other physical needs your participants still need to be aware of. So if there's like an issue with, maybe a child in the house, or there's a fire or something happening in real life, there needs to be a safety mechanic to stop the game and make sure the player always comes before the LARP. So that's also a GM responsibility and also a way the GM can lead. Emotional safety is the other key there. So a lot of LARPs, including the ones I write, specifically dive into close to home themes or things that the player can sort of play through. LARP isn't therapy, but it can be therapeutic. And as somebody with disabilities, I feel really comfortable providing a space to empower people to explore their marginalizations. So, for example, I have a LARP called First Bite, Second Birth. It's a digital LARP, and it's about new vampires who wake up and have a laptop in front of them. And when they open the laptop, they're on a video call with other new vampires, and they kind of had to figure stuff out. And myself and one of my friends, who also has a chronic illness, we had a discussion and decided we wanted to play with the idea of what happened if I had a chronic illness and woke up and like realized, okay, I have these like superpowers and it's gone. Like, how much of our identity is it? How can we explore this without having like the magical cure trope in the story? And like basically we were really looking at how big is this as a part of our identity. So in ways like that, the story can really empower people, and emotional safety is important. I had one other participant who was a man of color, and he chose to pursue empowerment in the LARP by playing a character who was very afraid of the police and had negative experiences with law enforcement. And then he becomes a vampire, and suddenly he realizes he can walk down the street and the police can try to brutalize him, but like they can't do anything to him. So, we've explored empowerment that way, and it's very interesting. LARPs
Yeah.
get a bad reputation for allowing people to play out power fantasies, but when you have a marginalization and you are powerless in society, and that narrative is constantly repeated to you and it's constantly reinforced that, like, you don't have health care, so you're worthless or something like that. It's great to have a place where you can go beyond that and explore your value, with or outside of whatever marginalization you have. So when we're playing those stories, emotional safety is intensely important. And
Yeah.
because it's so important, that's kind of where I developed my leadership capabilities, because you can't mess up on the safety stuff. You can't. Safety and inclusion and consent are everything when it comes to successful role play experiences.
Yeah, that's critical. So you mentioned some safety tools and you've mentioned character sheets. What other types of game mechanics are we talking about interacting with in terms of a digital LARP, or is it more freeform beyond that?
It's very freeform, although, so I started out on Google Hangouts. Now I use Zoom for a bunch of different reasons. But one thing Zoom has is there's a chat function. So when you click on the chat function, it pulls up like a little side tab where you have a group chat, but then you can also select an individual group member. So if I wanted to give a content warning because I was about to have fake blood, I could say that to everybody in the chat, or I could ask permission out of game. Or if you and I were role playing and I found that the relationship was becoming antagonistic or flirtatious, I could kind of privately message you and say, like, hey, this is what I'm feeling. Are you comfortable with that? And that negotiation can happen. Additionally, all of the players can privately message the game master. So, like, I always have a list of off limits topics, which usually, unless we're playing a very specific type of game that usually includes things like sexual assault and rape, and at any point in the game, people can add to that list. But they might not want to say it in the chat room in front of everyone. They can message me privately
Sure.
and add to the list, and I can say that, or they could say, I'm not really comfortable with where the story's going. And a big part of digital LARP is, and you probably discovered this through tabletop as well, 5,
Hmm.
6, maybe 7 players is kind of the max you should have in
Right.
one session before it gets a little out of control and people don't have the chance to talk. So I can usually manage that. And lastly, a game like Lore does have light mechanics. I have what are called resolution rounds, where people can do wild and fun and ridiculous things during a resolution round. So let's say they wanted to call in the military to airlift them off of the island. That's like a big action they could do. And
Hmm.
it's a single session game. So I'm always like, do it big, like they're conspiring with other governments and all sorts of stuff, becoming famous, streaming things. So the resolution rounds kind of enable the story to escalate. And people are also messaging me like, contrary things. So I get to, it's called a resolution round because then I resolve how that works out and then deliver the results, sometimes narratively, but also sometimes in game. So, mechanics can work that way. It's not always about dice rolling and stuff. But it's really fun. And, the safety mechanics that we use are important too. I use cut, which is saying the word cut and doing this X symbol if the player is able. And that stops the game and we confront what's happening. We use a mechanic called look down, which is like this. You put your hands over your eyes, like you're shielding them from the sun, and then you can turn your video off. And that's if you just need to walk away. Maybe you're not great with the content, but you don't want to talk about it. Maybe you've got to pee. That's usually why we use it. We need to use the bathroom or get a drink of water.
Gotcha.
So there's that. And then, of course, we have the chat, like I described before, where we can talk about whatever we need to.
That's awesome. So in your opinion, where do you think LARPs fit into the broader gaming community? Do you think everybody should try them, or are they really for a specific subset of people?
I think it's worth trying for just about everybody. It's not going to be everybody's favorite type of game. There are also people who love LARPing in person, but don't like digital, or vice versa. Some people are more comfortable digital than they are in person. It can get a little overwhelming, but there are also, believe it or not, 1 and 2 person LARPs. So if you're the kind of person that just feels overwhelmed during the pandemic, or you have an accessibility issue that makes it difficult for you to process a whole room full of people on a Zoom call, you can try a 2-person LARP to kind of get your feet wet. And it's cool because a lot of those are free. It's worth trying for just about anyone. And I also encourage my participants, if they feel comfortable, to disclose any issues that might come up. So I've had players who come out and say, like, hey, I'm autistic. If I don't get what you're throwing at me, please message me and like just explain it really straightforwardly. Or I tell people, like, if I'm having a high pain day, I let them know. I also, and you've probably seen this done in gaming before, if the player's having a rough health day, the character can too. In games where there's magic, maybe my character was cursed or something, and the players are really supportive when I have high pain days. And me disclosing encourages them to feel safe and be more open to. And I've had days where like multiple players don't feel well, and I say, player before LARP, let's reschedule, let's just play next week. And they're very appreciative of that. It's really important.
That's awesome. Is there anything else about digital LARP that we should know that I haven't already asked you?
I think the big point is that it's non-narrative, and people don't really necessarily understand that. So if you're not sure what that means, or you want to just check it out without playing, you can look up digital LARP trailer, and you'll get a YouTube video of my Chariot LARP, and you can actually just watch people play the game, so you don't have to participate to kind of understand what it's about.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about the LARPs that you have been involved in most recently? You mentioned Chariot LARP and Lore.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to do is convert my website to be more like an escape room, where a bunch of friends can go on the site and select any LARP I have that they want to play, or even ask me to design a new one, and I'll go ahead and do that. Excuse me. I also have Chariot LARP, weekend long, multiplayer, live action experience, sci-fi. The video camera is part of the game, and that's what I'm working on now. You can find more about that at chariotlarp.com.
Awesome. Is Chariot LARP your website, or do you have another one that's more of a portal?
The main website is the Geek Initiative, which is geekinitiative.com. You can also look up the Geek Initiative LARPs on Facebook to find me and our group. And in our group, I always mention my new releases before anyone else finds them. And we do have a Discord channel as well.
Awesome. So I always like to throw in one bonus question before we go. If you were a Star Trek character in a LARP, who would you be, and what do you think you'd be doing?
I love this question because one of the ways I became a nerd was by becoming obsessed with The Next Generation. And I am like the world's biggest Will Riker fan. I know everything about him. And so naturally, I also love Deanna Troi because she has a high level of empathy. And even though the writers didn't always do right by her, she really kind of like thoroughly explored that part of her, and it was shown as her strength. And I think that's really important in today's world, to be more empathetic. There is also an episode where she loses her empathic ability, and there are positive and negative things about how that's portrayed, but she eventually comes out and says, you need to understand, I've lost one of my senses. This is a disability. And when she comes out and kind of labels it and owns it, I always think about that, because I'm at the point where most of my illnesses are invisible most of the time. So it's good and bad, people will assume I'm not in pain when I'm very much in pain. But if I don't want to disclose that I'm disabled, I don't have to. And it's very hard for me to say the word disabled. And rewatching that episode and hearing her say it that way has really empowered me. And I loved her as a child. I still adore her as an adult. I feel like I'll be light, so I don't want to give spoilers, but I feel like her appearance in Picard was fantastic because they showed the range of not only her empathy and her betazoid nature, but also like just her general kindness and usefulness and spirit as a person. And so even though she's not the most popular, I love Deanna.
That is awesome. Well, Tara, thank you so much for joining me today and for taking some time to give us some insight into the world of digital LARP and to what you're doing. Is there any last thing that you'd like to say before we sign off?
I think that's it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
You're welcome, and thank you.